So, how will we know the truth in political worldview? How will we know which political worldview is the truth? This question is a very important question. I didn't think about it in that terms until my son one day, when I told him, you know, son, if I was a Republican, you would probably be a Republican. And then he asked me, Daddy, how will I know the truth? And I told him, I thought about it, and I told him, you won't know the truth. You know that things are more truthful and other things are less truthful. And how will you know that? You'll know truthiness has a kind of like two criteria. One of them is that it is unrelated to our desires. If you see a video clip of someone with a big mansion and a fancy car and lots of naked women dancing around him, you know that this is not the truth. This is a representation of desire, of fantasy. If you have a dragon, you know that it's not the truth, that you can ride a dragon. It's something that we may desire, to feel empowered, to feel wanted, to feel sexy. So this is definitely not the truth. But things become a little more subtle when people tell you, for example, that your nation is exceptional. This is also not the truth. But people, unlike dragon, people buy into this fantasy much more easily. So one criteria is that something goes not directly into our desires. Something is surprising to us. For example, photosynthesis has very little to do with our desires. It's a process that was discovered, it's surprising. It doesn't have to do with our fantasies. Evolution is also quite surprising and has nothing to do with our fantasies, with our sense of being the crown of creation, etc. Black holes have nothing to do with our desire, right? They're a surprising thing that happens in the world. Okay, so that's one criteria. A second criteria is universality. If something tells you that something is very special, something is very peculiar, then it's likely not to be the truth. Take, for instance, if someone told you that a cell, only this cell works this way, it would be a ridiculous notion, right? All cells of that particular kind, let's say blood cells, work in the same way. If someone told you that a white dwarf works in a certain way, or the sun works in a certain way, and that there's 1,000 other suns and they're not working in this way, this would be preposterous, right? There is a kind of sense in which an explanation needs to be universal for a whole class of things. So again, when people tell you that they're special, that their motivations are totally different from other people's motivation, when nations tell you that they're special, when workplaces tell you that they're special, when cities tell you that they're special, all of this is obviously a kind of fantasy, something that is untruthful. So to summarize, if we take a look, for example, at, let's say, a biblical narrative of creation versus evolution, we see all these two characteristics take place. For example, a biblical narrative has a special people, has a fantasy, a strong desire of a father looking after you, has a narrative which is related to our fears and desires in a very intimate way. We're punished, we're like children, we're kind of thrown out of Eden, etc. This is very, very anthropomorphic. If you're talking about the creation, evolutionary theory, in which things are evolving through billions of years, through slow modifications, has nothing of this fantasy or desire related thing to it. Also, if you look at human affairs, if you look at, and this is where it gets interesting, I think, in terms of the original question of how will I know a political worldview is true. Political worldview is true when it's surprising and has relatively less to do with our desires. For example, global warming has nothing to do with our desires. It's just a process, a byproduct of the way we're handling. The transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural society, for example, is not a process that has anything to do with our fantasies and desires. It's a process that was universal almost in different places in the world. It happened in America, independently from Europe and from Asia. And so this process is truthful. It's a story that is truthful. And it's not a story about me. It's not a story about the people around me. It's not a story about us versus them. It's a story about, it's a universal story. And it's a story that that is unrelated to our desires. No person comes in the morning and says, I fantasize about an agricultural society, about the transition from hunter-gatherer to agricultural society. And in fact, this transition had both benefits and a lot of costs. For example, creation of hierarchy between women and men, between rulers and ruled, between warring elites and priests and peasants that are exploited. So it's a real kind of thing that we can think about. So when you're looking at political worldviews and you're examining which one tends more toward truth, you should always consider that things should be, truth is usually unconnected with your desires, and truth is universal. That's it.